What's your sign? From being a cliched pickup line to an actual spiritual practice, astrology has maintained popularity for so many people throughout history. But how does it fit in with a Christian worldview? Is it okay to read your Bible and your horoscope? Are the zodiac signs harmless fun or an insidious tool of the enemy? And can't open-minded modern Christians make space for the potential truths found in these mystical practices? We're going to be talking about all of those things and more on today's episode of Theology on Air. Well, welcome back to Theology on Air. I am Sarah Stone, one of your hosts for today. I'm the Outreach Director for Young Adults at MDPC here in Houston, joined by the lovely co-producer, Evan McClanahan, Senior Pastor at First Lutheran in Midtown, Houston. And we're joined again, back by popular demand, by a friend of the show, our guest, Marcia Montenegro. Welcome, Marcia.
Hello. Thanks so much for having me, Sarah.
Of course. We may just have to make it a yearly tradition. Before trusting Christ, Marcia was a professional astrologer, so she's very well suited to talk to us today. She taught astrology as well as was involved in Eastern and New Age practices for many years. And through her ministry, Christian Answers for the New Age, which you can Google later if you want, Marcia speaks around the country and on podcasts and is a published writer. She has a master's in religion from Southern Evangelical Seminary in Charlotte, North Carolina, and serves as a missionary with Fellowship International Mission in Allentown, Pennsylvania. Phew, that's a lot.
Yeah.
You took all the energy from the New Age stuff and just put it into helping people understand.
Long words, long sentences. Yes.
No, it's great. It's great. And just for those of you joining us, if this is one of your first times checking out Theology on Air, we are a product of Theology on Tap, which is a ministry to young adults in Houston and all over in the virtual age, where we drink craft beer and we talk about fascinating things around culture and philosophy and religion, faith, the Bible, all of that. And so if you like us, please rate and review us or just hit that subscribe button. It's super easy. I did it today to one of my podcasts. It took 0.4 nanosecond. No, I'm making that up, but you should subscribe. And you can also check out more about us at HoustonTOT.com. And I think that's all of the boring stuff out of the way. So now we can get to the juicy stuff. What's your sign, Evan? Do you even know?
I'm a Scorpio. So
okay. I'm a Libra.
Tell me everything that means. Should we be friends?
I was going to say, do we make good friends or is this dude?
Oh, forget it. I think we all should just give up.
She won't even play act anymore.
I know. She's like, it's even that bad.
Yeah.
Well, okay. So Marcia, I know you did a little bit of this in the podcast, but assuming people are listening today that didn't hear that one, just tell us a little bit about your own kind of personal background and what drew you to astrology to begin with. And I do want to eventually hear how you were drawn out of it. Maybe that's part of this, or maybe we tell that further on, but excuse me.
Okay. Yes, my background is many years, 20 years in what is called the New Age. And that included getting involved in some Eastern religions. Mm-hmm. I was interested in Hinduism at first and read some stuff on that. I became a believer in reincarnation. And I went from there into a Tibetan Buddhist group. I didn't belong to the group, but I went to the weekly meetings and I was taught how to meditate by the leader of that group, the Tibetan Buddhist type meditation. I read a lot of books by the leader of that particular school of Tibetan Buddhism. There's 4 major schools of Tibetan Buddhism. A lot of people think the Dalai Lama is it. But actually, he's the head of one of the 4 schools.
And he was sort of the Pope of Buddhism, but I guess not.
He became the head guy. Yes, he did become the head guy. But there are 3 other schools of Buddhism, and they all have, variations. They're all not exactly the same. And the one I was a part of was led by a guy named Chogyam Trungpa, who was known as the bad boy of Buddhism.
That's kind of a fun title.
That's another story.
Sort of like
quite a story. I mean, I have stories about my some of the things in that group. And so I was involved in that. And then I went from that into Zen Buddhism. I don't remember how that happened, but I was reading some materials on Zen Buddhism, things by Alan Watts and T.D. Suzuki and people like that who basically helped popularized Zen Buddhism in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And I was drawn more to Zen Buddhism and left Tibetan Buddhism more or less behind, most of it. And at the same time, I had an interest and always had an interest in the supernatural.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, I was interested in astrology in high school. And that never left me. In college, I still had that interest, and I knew a little bit about each of the 12 zodiac signs, to the extent that I would get questions from friends like, I really like Jack, but he's a Aries, and I am Pisces. Would we get together? Would we get along? So I would get questions like that from time to time. So that stayed with me, but I didn't actually plunge into the world of astrology until I had already been in the New Age for several years.
Mm-hmm.
And then I took some astrology classes, and that made me like it even more, even though the initial part of it is learning math. Because
oh yeah, that would lose me.
Well, I tell you that, I tell people that just shows how much I wanted to learn it, because I hate math, and I really struggled in school with math. I mean, all forms of it. It doesn't matter what it was. I'm just terrible. I'm still terrible at math, but I don't even know how to calculate a percentage of something. I mean, I'm just really bad. But
so if you ever received a reading, your astrology reading from Marcia, now it's devoid because her math is terrible. So we can't even count any of that.
No,
you
actually,
can get your money back.
I did learn it enough though to pass the test, because then I had to take a 7-hour exam.
Ooh.
So I learned it. Not only did I learn how to do it, but I taught people how to calculate the chart mathematically. I had those formulas down pat.
Wow.
So you learn a series of formulas, and what you're doing is you're learning to convert, for example, Central Time or Pacific Time, whatever time the person was born in, you're learning to convert that to actual real time, because those are not real times. Those are artificial times.
Okay.
So you learn to convert it to the actual real time, and then you base the chart, the picture of all the planets and the sun and moon at the time of birth, on the place of birth. So the location is going to make a difference.
Yeah.
And that comes out into a circle, 360 degrees, that's divided usually into 12 areas, like 12 pieces of pie. And those are the 12 houses.
Oh, okay.
So you have, house number 1 through 12, and the sun, moon, and planets will fall in there depending on where they were at the time and place of birth. So It's a very kind of individualized birth. That's the birth chart. That's what astrologers do. They compute, or now, of course, computers do it. So you don't have to do it by hand. And they get the chart computed, and that's what's used by the astrologer to interpret the position of those planets.
Okay.
So anyway, I was very fascinated by this. I think because I was drawn to it because it was like kind of like learning another language. You had the planets and you had the signs. What did they mean? What does Gemini mean? What does Aries mean? What does it mean to have the sun at the top of your chart, et cetera, et cetera? All of this intrigued me, I think, because I was just intrigued by knowing things most people didn't know. I think that's something that just was a draw for me.
Mm-hmm.
And astrology, for whatever reason, had this kind of pull on me. I felt really called to it. And of course, one way I explained that was I must have been an astrologer in previous lives.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So that made sense to me then, that I thought that when I believed that, I thought, see, that's why I like astrology. I've done it before.
Yeah.
And so I had to, in Atlanta, which is where I was living, they had a very active astrological society. And they actually had set up an exam because there had been a time when astrology was illegal in Atlanta, which it still is illegal in a lot of cities. It depends on the city. It's a very localized kind of jurisdiction. It's ruled by local officials. So it could be the city, it could be the county, it could be the state. Usually it's the city or the county. And Atlanta had, in the city limits, it was illegal to do astrology because it was classified as fortune telling, and fortune telling was technically illegal. So the astrologers went to, well, one of them went to White Fowler, who eventually became a senator. And he was on the city council and said, you know, this isn't fair because we really work hard at what we do. We're not con artists, et cetera, et cetera. So they said, okay, what we're going to do is we'll make it so that you can't do this if you're a con artist. You have to really know what astrology is about. You can't just make things up. So they had it so that you had to pass an exam, and then you had to buy a business license from the city to practice legally. But to buy the business license, you had to qualify by showing you passed an exam. So there is an exam given by the American Federation of Astrologers that's given at different times of the year in different cities. But Atlanta set up its own astrology board of examiners so that you didn't have to travel. You could just take the test there in Atlanta.
Okay.
And so that was set up before I came onto the scene. That was set up before I came to Atlanta. And I think it was set up like in 1969 or something like that. So by the time I took the exam, it had been around for a number of years, but it was a 7-hour exam. It's actually very complicated because not only do you do the math and you have to calculate a chart by hand, you can't use a calculator or anything. But then you have to interpret a chart too. So you have to write out the interpretation. That's why it's a 7-hour exam.
It sounds terrible, but
well, I was nervous. Yeah, I was nervous, but I passed.
Like that's longer than the GRE, and that hurt my brain.
But at least when you're, getting your whatever and you're paying for it, you're getting your money's worth. I mean, they're not just a hack, so they're.
Yeah, actually, you don't. I'm trying to remember if I even had to pay for. I think an astrologer showed me how to do this because there wasn't a class. I eventually became a teacher for the class for people who wanted to take the test. And it was my idea to offer workshops on it. And I usually had 2 workshops. Each one would be like 3 hours or something. And you would come and I would teach you how to calculate it. And then I would go over the basics of interpretation for people who wanted to take the exam. But when I had to learn it, I had to learn it from one of the astrologers there in Atlanta, just one-on-one. I don't think he charged me, as I recall. He didn't charge me.
Let's scoot forward just a little bit, just for those of people that haven't. When I was little, I was told not to mess with astrology. So I joke about it. I literally just know that I'm a Libra. That's it. I know nothing else. So for other people that know nothing else, walk us through what it might look like if someone comes to you and then you make a chart for them. What kinds of things are you telling them? What kinds of, and how is it that the stars and moon and which house and moon rising and Mercury, and I don't know all the stuff. How is that supposed to tell them things about themselves? Like, kind of give us a little picture.
Okay. There. Well, the astrologer believes that the birth chart represents your life path. It represents your personality, your characteristics, your weaknesses, your strengths, and what you have brought into this life from a previous life. Most astrologers, at least the ones I knew, believed in reincarnation because we were.
Is that a must for astrology? Is that a requirement?
It's not a must. It's not a must, but it tends to be a common view.
Okay.
Because most astrologers are New Agers. So
yeah.
In this country. So most New Agers believe in reincarnation.
I'm only asking some of these questions because I know we have several people that are Christians that think there's nothing wrong with this. And so I'm thinking through the sort of what you would say, like, well, do you also believe in reincarnation? Okay, but continue on.
Okay, so the astrologer will have looked at the chart beforehand. Then when they're with the client, they will just start interpreting. I used to just look at whatever seemed to be the most dominant factor in the chart. And I would start with that, which would mean that there may be a planet was at a particular crucial point in the chart. There's 4 cardinal points. And if you have a planet there, that's very supposedly meaningful. Mm-hmm. Or maybe there may be a powerful conjunction, like your sun might be conjunct Saturn and Neptune or something like that, which would be unusual. And you would want to talk about that. So I would start with what seemed to be a really strong point in the chart. And then I would just kind of go from there because there's so much to say. there's so many different combinations and options going on in the chart. For example, you could have a sun, you could have been born a Libra like you, but your sun is maybe next to Neptune and it's in the ninth house, which is a house of expansion, adventure, education. And now, or if I'm looking at a chart with a sun and Neptune in Libra, maybe in the 12th house, that would be a different interpretation. So you're looking at these factors and interpreting them as you look at them. And I would say things like, I can see that you have a very strong need to push boundaries. I see that you have a need to go outside the box, that you like to explore. You probably like to travel or want to travel. You don't like to be confined. You don't do well with structure. That's just an example, but I would
Sure.
continue on, because then I would look at relationships and I would talk about relationships. You're attracted to older men. You're attracted to men like your father, or you're attracted to very unstable, unpredictable men. Okay. So that might be the planet Uranus in the 7th house of relationships. So, there's all these different factors you're putting in there, and you start adding on layers and layers of things. And
Yeah.
so then it goes to relationship. Maybe you talk about the childhood, if there's significant factors supposedly about the childhood, the job, career, maybe. It's those kind of things and that's what most people want to know
Of
about.
course they do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And especially, of course, my women clients wanted to know about relationships most of all. Male clients,
We want to know about jobs and monster trucks.
Oh my
yeah,
God.
well, I don't know how to do a monster truck from an astrology chart. I don't know how you see the monster truck in the astrology chart. That's kind of funny. Yeah, but yeah, men would be more oriented towards their goals. What should they do with their life? They would want to know about relationships as well. Sometimes if they were like in one and they were maybe had questions about it.
Yeah.
But so those are the areas that you touch on. I'm not financially oriented, and I'm not good at economic things, but there is a way where you supposedly can see financial things in the chart, but I never did it because I'm not good at that and I didn't learn it. So
Yeah, I
I
can
don't
see
give it
though, I
because
can see how people would not only people that would come to you would love to hear this kind of stuff. It's what we all want to know. We want to talk about ourselves. We want to
Mhm,
think about ourselves. But I
mhm.
can imagine as you being the one talking to people, like it feels like you're helping them and you're
Yes.
making connections. That's got to feel good. You were going to say something, Evan?
Well, who wrote the chart? You keep talking about the chart. Are there competing charts? Is there an author of this chart? I'm guessing it evolved over time, and from the great mystics,
Yeah.
and nobody really knows. It's just, well, obviously nobody wrote it really. If it's true, it's just in the stars. But
Oh,
you know, right? But
Okay. Yeah. Actually, there's an answer to what you're asking. Astrology, for example, as it's practiced today, is very different from even, or somewhat different from 100 years ago, or maybe a little over 100 years ago. It was much more fatalistic. Like in the 1800s, it was very fatalistic. And my understanding is that astrology in India is still like that. That's more fatalistic. So you look at things in the chart and it's more definitive, like, well, you are going to have unsuccessful marriages, or you will never be happy with your children, or something like that. It's a more fatalistic thing. Whereas when psychology came about in the late 19th century and early 20th century, astrology had a tremendous influence. Psychology had a tremendous influence on astrology. And there were some early astrologers in the early 1900s who started combining psychological concepts with the chart, with the planets and what they represented. So they started representing psychological factors about a person as well as the traditional meaning. And then Carl Jung, who was
he's at the bottom of so many problematic things.
he
Sorry.
is, he is,
except for
he is.
except for the Police's album Synchronicity, which was influenced by Jungian philosophy. Carry on.
Thank you for
Oh,
that.
okay.
Yeah.
So Carl Jung had this view of archetypes, and he believed that in the collective unconscious of humanity, something kind of like a mind we all share,
Mm-hmm.
are these images and ideas that we all have and we all look up to. And these are like archetypes like the hero, the mother,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, the martyr, different archetypes. And he believed that the planets were tied into these archetypes. And so he saw astrology as a way, he believed astrology expressed some of these things he believed. And that kind of thinking got very much into astrology. A lot of astrologers are actually also Jungian psychotherapists.
Mm-hmm.
And so the Jungian worldview is often a part of astrology. Now, I'm not saying every astrologer would necessarily use it, but a lot of them
Sure.
do. I did, my friends did. We read stuff like that and incorporated into astrology. And so you're also kind of doing this pseudo psychological
Mm-hmm.
counseling session with the client. You're
Mm-hmm.
not just telling them things about this and that, this about your mother, this about your husband, whatever. You're talking about them as a person. Like, you really have a hard time letting go. You really want to hang on to what's secure. You're afraid of something new. That kind of, we kind of put this psychological spin on it.
Yeah.
And so these sessions were sort of like a therapy session. Although I'm not qualified as a counselor or a psychologist, I have no training in it, except things I read on my own. But I essentially was acting that way for a lot of clients. And a lot of clients would tell me, hey, you know me better than my therapist. I mean, I had some of them tell me that. So or they would say, oh, that's what my therapist says. Well, it's just part of the way the astrological chart seems to work. And I want to really emphasize seems to work,
Yeah.
not work.
Well, that's actually what we're getting to next, because I think the question on everybody's mind is, so what's so terrible about it? Starting with, is it actually accurate? Does it work? I mean, if we want to say that there's something wrong with it spiritually, we can say that. But if it actually has it turns out that when you were born really does define XYZ, then we have to wrestle with that. So is there any accuracy to it?
There appears to be there is apparent accuracy.
Parent accurate. Okay.
And there's reasons for that. There's several reasons. One is when somebody consults an astrologer, in most cases, they either believe in astrology or they want to believe in it,
Mm-hmm.
or they think there might be something to it. So they're
There's
open.
like confirmation bias kind of.
Yeah, they're open to it. So that helps them, believe the things they hear. Secondly, the person is listening and remembering selectively.
Oh,
So
yeah.
the client will remember things the astrologer said that were accurate and forget the things that aren't, or maybe explain them away.
That's convenient for you as the
Well,
astrologer.
well, yeah, and that's how things like that work. That's how personality tests work.
Yeah.
How they work too.
Yeah.
And so you're being selective without realizing it. A third factor is that general statements made by the astrologer will be applied specifically by the client. So I may make something that's more or less a general statement, like you really hate to let go of things. It makes you feel insecure. And they may think of a specific thing they're going through or have gone through, and that where they were like that. And they'll think, yeah, that's so true. That's so me.
Mm-hmm.
When maybe if they really took a long look at their life, maybe they've actually done well in some situations that they were able to let go of. But you tend to grab onto something you relate to right away. There's another factor. There's the factor of coincidence. You can
Sure.
never rule that out. The other factor, and this is really the real truly evil factor, is that astrologers have spirit guides. Okay, I had spirit guides. My friends had spirit guides. This was a common thing. We all knew it. Spirit guides are common in the New Age. They believe these are people may have different ideas of who these spirit guides are. I believed that they were these advanced spiritual souls who had lived many lives and had evolved to this higher level of knowledge and wisdom.
Hmm.
And they were there on another plane of reality, but they were there to teach people like me who were on a spiritual path
Mm-hmm.
and were trying to advance spiritually in their life. And as an astrologer, I'm trying to help others advance spiritually. So I would have a spirit guide who would help me with that. So I believed that my spirit guide was helping me guide me through my chart, and I did often feel guided through the chart. So
Do you now attribute that to just your own kind of brain telling you, or do you think there was something actually demonic happening
oh
there?
no, I think there was something demonic. I had been introduced to my main spirit guide in a guided meditation when I'd taken a course called Inner Light Consciousness. And I had taken this course before I became an astrologer. I didn't know we were going to get a spirit guide from this. I took the course because it was about inner light consciousness, and that idea appealed to me.
Mhm.
And it was basically a crash course in the New Age. It's what it was. And they did a guided visualization every night, which took you through the seven. It starts off at one color where you visualize something red. You visualize a scene that you want to see, and you see it as red, and then you see it as yellow. And actually, what that correlates to are the seven chakras.
Chakras. I knew
Yeah,
it.
yeah, you knew it. You got an A.
Well, or yeah, or I've made some unwise choices. It's fine. My chakras are aligned. Everything's
Isn't that
fine.
when they put the hot rocks on you at the spa? That they do that on the spa?
Yes,
They mess with your
yes,
chakras there too. Yeah.
Okay, that's all I
yeah.
have.
That's supposed to be on the chakras, right?
Okay.
So I've been warning people for years about spas. They're very new age. So you visualize this. I realized later it was chakras. I didn't realize it at the time. And then on the very last night, the teacher said, okay, tonight at the end of the meditation, we're going to do something different. You're going to be introduced to your spiritual master. That's
Ooh,
what
ooh.
he called it. Yeah, spiritual master.
That's a triggering word for me. When I hear master or slave, it makes me think of slaves, right? Like that's
Yeah,
that would
yeah,
have been a
yeah.
that didn't tip you out, that didn't feel yucky. You were along for the ride.
I was excited
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
I thought, this will be something, this will be somebody to help me.
Mhm.
Okay. And so when we did the meditation and he added that on at the end, after that was over, he asked people to share,
Mhm.
who did you see, what happened, what did the master say anything, blah, blah, blah. So a few of us shared about it. I did see somebody. He didn't talk to me, but I saw him. And I actually felt his presence with me from that day on.
Ooh, Marsha, man.
Mm.
Yeah, well, that actually, that was sort of a turning point for me because after that point, it's like everything just accelerated in my spiritual life as far as New Age spirituality goes. It just
Mhm.
accelerated.
Do you mean
Because,
your interest in it, or do you mean your ability to? Because one of the questions is sort of what makes it work. So spirit guides is one of the
yeah,
things. So did it accelerate its accuracy or something to that effect?
both. It accelerated my interest and my ability to have what I called psychic experiences revved up quite a bit. I'd had some along the way. And especially when I started doing astrology, I would have insights on the person that just came into my brain.
Mm.
And they were often very accurate. And now I definitely think this was from my spirit guide or guides that was passing me this information about the person because some of them were too specific
Mhm.
for me, to say it was coincidence. They were just too specific. So, and plus they were just kind of like these flashes, either an image or some words that would come to my head. And then I
Wow.
would say something to the client and they would say, how did you know that? And I would say, well, it's in your chart because while I was looking at the chart that it would come to me.
Mhm.
So I definitely, believe spirit guides are real. Now, I should say what the spirit guides are. The spirit guides are not these advanced, enlightened spiritual beings who want to help you. They're fallen angels, is what they
Yeah.
are. They're
Yeah.
not wanting to help you. They're wanting to lead you away from Christ, lead you away from God, lead you into further and further deception. That's what they want
Yeah.
to do.
I have to ask, I want to talk a bunch more about all of the kind of astrological stuff, but I'm just so curious. Everything that you're describing sounds like it would just make it more and more tempting, more and more kind of like a sexy allure to this whole thing. So, what in the world brought you out of it? Like, how did you come out of this? I know I'm jumping to the end of the story, but I'm
Okay, you want to
why
hear
not?
the end?
Yeah, and then I mean, I want to talk more about actual
Okay,
astrology, what the
okay.
problem is, how we respond to people. But I mean, as you're talking, I think, why would you ever leave that? It sounds amazing for someone to walk into your whatever studio or whatever, and for you to know things about them. I would never want to walk away from that if I didn't already know there was something wrong.
I didn't want to walk away from it. I had
Yeah.
no desire to leave it. I loved astrology. I was a teacher. I was teaching astrology. I was chairperson of the Astrology Board of Examiners for 3 of the 4 years I was on it. I was president of the Astrological Society. I was incredibly involved. I was on like 4 different committees, including the speakers committee, where I went and spoke to groups in the city, like the Lions Club,
Yeah.
Parents Without Partners, about astrology.
Oh,
So I was very much into it, and I loved being an astrologer. So I had no desire to leave it. So what it took was God just intervening in my life. Just frankly, just he did it in this kind of, it wasn't a sudden thing. It was like this gradual thing where I first started getting this compulsion to go to a church.
hmm.
And this was the spring where I was beginning to end my term as president of I was still president of the Astrological Society. And I started getting this compulsion to go to a church, which I didn't understand because I didn't go to church, and I
Yeah.
didn't want to go to church. So I didn't understand why I felt I should go. And it was very strong, like it wouldn't leave me alone. But I didn't want to go, so I didn't go. And that started around, it was in the spring, so I'm thinking it was probably in April. And then it continued on through the summer. In August, I went to an astrological conference in Eugene, Oregon. It was sponsored by the guy who published a magazine that I had been writing for 3 years. And it was the second time he had done it. He had done one 2 years earlier, and I had spoken at that conference. And he flew me. I mean, my expenses were all paid. The flight, the hotel, everything was paid, my food. And I gave a couple of workshops at that conference. And actually, a few things weird happened there, but it'll take too long if I go into that. So I'll just say
Okay.
strange things happened. Then I came back to Atlanta, and that compulsion to go to a church hadn't gone away. So I decided it was probably something from one of my past lives as a Christian that
Oh,
had been,
interesting twist you gave
yeah.
yourself.
Well, that was my rationalization. I
Yeah.
thought, okay, there's
This
probably,
pesky past life. Yeah.
yeah, unfinished business. So I thought I'm going to go to a church and maybe I'll realize what it is.
Yeah.
So I went to this really large church in downtown Atlanta where I'd never been, where I was sure nobody knew me. And well, most people in most churches would not have known me because
Yeah.
I wasn't going to church.
Or maybe they had your name on bulletin boards. Like, if you've seen this woman, do
Right.
not listen to what she
Right.
says. No.
So I went there, and I sat in the back on the end of the pew because my plan was to leave after 15 or 20 minutes.
Sure.
I thought I'm going to get my insight, in the first 15 or 20 minutes. If I don't, I'm going to leave. So I sat there. They started the service. Everyone stood up. They played music. They had a procession from the back. Now, the churches I had gone to mostly when I was younger, besides some generic Protestant churches when we lived overseas, um, were Baptist type churches. So I wasn't
Mhm.
used to liturgy or anything, but I was standing up, and they had this procession from the back, and there was a young boy carrying a cross at the head of the procession. And as he walked by me, this really very freaky thing happened. I felt this love
Hmm.
pouring on me like a waterfall from
Oh.
above. I knew it was from God. I knew it was from a personal God telling me he loved me. Okay, now that
Wow.
I don't think I can really express how bizarre this was to me because I didn't believe in a personal God.
Hmm.
Yet I knew this personal God was real.
Just like that. That's
Well, I knew it was
amazing.
real, but I still didn't really believe it. I don't know how to explain it. It was like I knew it was real, but I think maybe I didn't want to believe it.
Sure.
But it was like he was expressing love to me. And I actually had tears coming down my cheeks. And so I stayed for the whole service.
Yeah.
And then I decided to go back the following Sunday. So I went back and I kept going each Sunday. Now I was still completely immersed in my New Age world. I didn't understand what was being said in the service or why it was being said. I even ended up, I met this woman who had left the Catholic Church because she wanted to be a priest. And of course, you can't do that in the Catholic Church. So she decided to become Episcopalian.
Mm-hmm.
And she told me about this group that was meeting with the rector every week. He's like the minister,
Yeah.
meeting with the rector. And she said, you should come to the group. It's really great. We're doing this and that. And I thought, okay, I want to meet people. So I started going to this group. And he was going through the Gospel of Mark. And I still didn't understand things. I just did not understand what was being said. I was just so, I was so, I was so steeped in my New Age worldview. I was completely it was just uncomprehending to me what Christianity really was, even though I had supposedly learned about it when I was younger. Um, and but that one thing I noticed was during the services when they said Jesus Christ or the Lord Jesus Christ, that it had this effect on me, and sort of like this electrical effect or something, and it just kind of like would grab me. I didn't understand why, but I liked hearing it. I liked hearing the Lord Jesus Christ. And within a matter of weeks, I started getting the impression that astrology, God didn't like astrology. Now, I kind of knew that astrology and Christianity supposedly didn't mix. I just had picked that up. I knew the Bible I didn't know for sure, but I figured the Bible was against it. But this was still kind of startling to me because it was so personal. And it was like God was telling me, astrology is bad. And I didn't like that message.
Yeah.
So I just resisted it and put it to the side. But it was hard. It was very hard. And then shortly after that, the message became, I want you to give it up. Now, I want to emphasize, I wasn't hearing a voice.
Yeah.
It was impression is my best word for it. Just this kind of impression. And I thought, why should I give astrology up? Because I'm helping people.
Oh,
Why does God want me to give up something that people tell me that, I'm helping them?
yeah.
So wouldn't God be for this? And so that confused me. But and I didn't want to give it up. So I resisted for a short while. I wasn't able to resist very long. And I thought I've got to give this up. And I just made a decision to give it up. And this was very strange. A lot of strange things happened around this time. And my clients would call me and they would want to make an appointment with me because I usually saw my clients would come see me at least once a year for an update on their chart, because you look at for the present position of the outer planets and where they're moving in the next year.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So you do like an update. So
That checks out.
and I would tell them I can't do it, or I would have a new client call me that got my name from someone and want me to do their chart. And I said, I'm sorry, I can't do it. And so if the people knew me, they would say, why can't you do it? And I would say, because somehow astrology is separating me from God.
Wow.
And they would say, how? And my answer was, I don't know. That was my
Well, that's honest. I mean,
I said, I don't know. I said, I really don't know, but somehow it is. And they were like, well, okay, whatever, And so then I would give them the name of another astrologer. So I was in this sort of limbo where I wasn't an astrologer and I wasn't a Christian. And it was really just this limbo, this really weird space where I did not know what was going on, but I decided that I should read the Bible. Since I was going to this church and I wasn't doing astrology. So I thought, okay, I'll read the Bible. I started with Matthew chapter 1, verse 1, and I started reading a little bit every night. I didn't understand really what I was reading, but I was reading it. I noticed though that the words I think I even wrote this in my journal, that the words of the Bible were pure. That was the
Hmm.
word, that was the word I used. They're pure. They're like, it's like I hadn't ever read anything else where I thought the words were pure. And these words were pure. And that had a real effect on me because it was different from anything I had read before. And then one evening, as I was reading an account in Matthew 8, it's actually the account of Jesus on the boat and the storm. And the disciples wake him up and he rebukes the sea and the wind. And it was in the Matthew account that I was reading. And that story just kind of grabbed me and I kept rereading it. And as I was reading it again for, I don't know what, maybe the third or fourth time, I don't know now. I don't know, my eyes were just open. God opened my eyes and I saw who Jesus really was. And I realized I had been separated from God my whole life, that I had been on the spiritual path leading away from God,
Wow.
that I had a false God, a false Jesus, that if I had died, I would have gone to hell. All of these things, like I sort of realized in like just, I don't know, a matter of seconds.
Hmm.
And I just turned my life over to Christ at that moment. And I immediately knew I was a different person. Now, this is a very dramatic conversion. I think partly because of what I came out of, but I think also partly God had it that way so I could share this.
Yeah, exactly.
Because a lot of people have told me that this has encouraged them to pray for people that they have seen very resistant.
Yeah.
And I tell them, look, if God can reach me, I mean, God
Yeah,
can reach anybody. It's not just because he can reach me. He can reach anybody he wants to.
that's right.
But, this tends to encourage people. Now, and what I need to say is the backstory, the behind the scene things going on that I did not know about at the time. And I found out actually in April. This happened on December 21st when I
That's
trusted
the
Christ.
longest night of the year.
Yeah, isn't that
Serious.
interesting? Yeah.
That's kind of cool though. I mean, it has something to do with stars and everything, but
Yeah, it was. It's like the winter solstice. It
yeah.
was that was the day. And I found out in April. I was working part-time in an office. This is a side story. I was hired, my marriage had ended.
Hmm.
I needed income. One of my clients was the head of an office, and he invited me he said he would pay me to help give him astrological advice on the employees. He had like 40 people under him. And he said, I'll give you their birth data and you can give me insights on them.
Wow.
And
This
that's
is
why he
before the
hired me.
days where you could just dig around on social media and find
Yeah,
out
yeah, no
everything.
social media then.
Yeah.
Um, so I was working there part-time and being paid by him. Now, when I gave astrology up, obviously I couldn't keep doing that. But here's the thing, the way God timed everything, when I gave astrology up, it was early December. My boss was on a leave of absence and he was away like 6 weeks. So
Okay.
he did not come back till January. Well, I trusted Christ on December 21st. So when he came back, I was able to tell him I couldn't do it anymore and why. Because if I had to tell him before that, I wouldn't have been able to explain it really, you see. But now I had a testimony. And so he was very nice and he gave me busy work and I stayed on for a while. And
Oh.
there was a coworker there that who had befriended me, who was a Christian. And he had often talked to me in these very non-threatening ways. I mean, like he never told me astrology was wrong. He knew I was an astrologer, but he would ask me questions about things. And then I would give my opinion. And he would say, well, what do you think of this? And I kind of liked the fact he would ask me because I thought, well, he obviously respects my opinion. And he's just all what was going on. I found out in April is that he had been praying for me with a fellowship group, a young adult, you guys, you young adults out there, a young adult fellowship group at his church was praying for me. And I didn't know that till April, when he came into my office. And I said, Jeff, I can't believe a few months ago I was an astrologer and now I'm a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
And he kind of smiled and he said, maybe somebody was praying for you. And I said, no, I don't know anybody who would pray for me. And then I see, this look on his face. And I said, oh, wait a minute, were you praying for me? And he said, well, my fellowship, my young adult fellowship group at my church, we were praying for you all last year. They've
Wow.
been praying when all that stuff happened. They had been
Yeah.
praying for me. So I actually had gone
Cool.
into his office in January and told him I'd become a Christian, and he didn't tell me that then.
Can I just jump in and ask a couple of
Yeah.
quick questions? One is someone on Facebook asked, "What's the name of your ministry?"
I already answered that person.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Christian Answers for the New Age.
Okay, thank you.
I go there a lot, more than I ought to look up articles on all kinds of things.
I have a website, and it's also a Facebook page as well.
Okay. What happened to your spirit guide when you converted?
I totally was going to ask that.
Yeah, this is
You read
what happened.
Matthew 8, and did you feel like, I don't know, 7 ounces lighter or something?
To break up with him, or
Yeah.
This is what happened. I did not think about him at the time. What happened is, I left that church because it was a very open-minded church. I mean, I had people there who wanted my business card. And God showed me through a series of things that I won't go into that I needed to leave that church. I went to another church that was a bit better, but kind of a mixed bag. But I didn't know how to find a good church. I mean, I didn't know anything. I was a newbie.
Yeah.
And so, but I did find this church that was better. And so what happened was I decided I would join this church, which meant I would go to the front of the church, and the minister would ask me if I trusted in Christ and all of that. I wanted to be baptized, and he didn't want to baptize me. I had to get baptized later, and that's because I was baptized when my mother decided I would be baptized when I was younger. It was not a believer's baptism.
Yeah.
And I knew that, of course, but he didn't want to baptize. He was a Disciples of Christ minister.
Okay.
I think that has something to do with it. But so anyway, I would have to go up there. He would ask me questions, and it would be a public proclamation of my faith. So that was Palm Sunday. And so as I sat in the pew, I started feeling sick. And I started feeling nauseous and dizzy and just really weak, like really, really weak. And I thought, I don't know if I can even walk up to the front of the church. But I managed to do it, and officially, said I believed in Christ. And I still was feeling bad. I had met two people, they are former New Agers and former members of the Church of Scientology, who became my first Christian friends. And I think the Lord provided them in my life. Tom and Carol, if you're listening, I love you guys. And they could relate to me, and I could relate to them. And I learned so much from them. And we went to lunch, and I said, I've just got to go home. I don't feel well. I need to lie down. I went home. I was lying down, and now here, I don't know if I imagined it or I saw it, but I really think I saw things in my room moving. And I felt this presence of somebody very, 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 I mean, angry in a way of like, not just angry, but like hostility, just horrible, horrible hatred.
Wow.
And then I knew it was my spirit guide, my main spirit guide. And I realized, at least I thought at the time, that he had made me sick. Now, I don't know if that's true or not. But I said, it doesn't matter how sick you make me. Even if I die, then I'll just go be with Christ. You can't do anything to me. And then I said, I think after I said that, you can't do anything to me, that he left.
Wow.
I didn't tell him to go. I just said, you can't do anything to me because I'll just be with Christ.
Yeah.
So, you go ahead and kill me. I'll just go to Christ, And so that's what I said. And then he was gone.
I love it. It's sassy and true. I mean,
it's true. And now I do want to add a little thing here, that I actually don't advise people to talk to demons. I don't really think I don't think, personally, this is my own take on it, I don't think it's really biblical. I think that in that instance, I was a new Christian. I didn't know anything. God was showing me. I think God allowed this to happen for me to understand, because I had not understood this, that my spirit guide was a demon and was against Christ. I had not realized that. And so all these months later, God let me see it, I guess, when I was ready to see it.
Yeah.
And my statement was basically an affirmation of who the spirit guide was, and that I had nothing to do with him anymore. And so I think Christ took him away. I don't think I made him leave.
Sure. Sure.
I think
No, of course not.
Christ removed him.
Wow,
So
that is powerful stuff, though. My
If only
goodness.
there was a herd of swine nearby, it would have even been awesome. But
Okay, well, what a story. We could just do a whole episode just on your story or make it into a movie, my word.
Yeah.
But I do want to get back to a couple of the questions just to flesh out a little bit more about the whole astrology thing. Help me out just quickly. Are horoscopes are just sort of like a daily version of your astrological reading, is that correct?
they're daily or monthly.
Okay.
No, in the newspaper, they're usually daily, but in magazines, like almost every woman's magazine, oh my
Yeah.
goodness, it has a monthly horoscope. Here's your monthly horoscope for June, And so those are done, the daily ones are done mainly on the movement of the moon, because the moon moves very quickly. So it changes signs every 2.5 days.
Okay.
And so they'll look at the moon and maybe Mercury and Venus and Mars, and Mercury and Venus move faster than the other planets. And then they'll correlate that to your sun sign.
Okay.
So they'll come up with a message based. I actually wrote a horoscope column for actually it was a gay newspaper for for a very short while. I was filling in for somebody. I didn't really like doing it because you're just saying something kind of general.
Yeah.
And I didn't really like it that much, but that's how you do it. The monthly, they would look at the monthly movements of the moon and Venus, Mercury, and Mars. Mars doesn't move that fast, but it's a little faster. And they might look at where the outer planets are. So you could look at the monthly movement for each sign, and you would come up with something to say, so this is what your month will be like.
Yeah. Okay, so you've talked a lot about moon and sun and planets. So I'm sure one of the questions that people have is like astronomy and astrology seem to often get put together. So I would love for you to speak a little bit to like what's the difference between astrology and astronomy, but also I think people tend to do that with some of the stories from the Bible, even like the Magi, right? They followed a star and they were sort of astronomers slash were they into
They,
some kind of
yeah,
astrology?
yeah, they were both. Because at the time, now the difference is that astronomy is a science,
Right.
and astronomy looks at the physical aspects of the heavenly bodies,
Yeah.
their movements, and things like that. It doesn't have a meaning. Astronomers don't think Mars has anything to do with your ego, or that Venus has anything to do with your relationships.
Right.
That's
Right.
astrology. So when you give a meaning to it, then you've crossed over to astrology.
Yeah.
Now, astrologers use some astronomical data, like when they calculate the chart, but then they're doing it because they believe there's a meaning there. The Magi at the time in the ancient world, of course, there wasn't the concept of science. And astronomy, looking at the stars and the planets, of course, they didn't even know they were planets. They thought the planets were stars.
Yeah.
So they were fast moving too, compared to the other stars that hardly moved. You're looking up at, Venus, or, it's going to be moving much faster than a star. So they gave significance to the planets. And of course, they could only see up through Saturn at the time. They couldn't see Uranus, Neptune, or Pluto, which were discovered much later. And so they would talk about these more or less as omens. These were seen more as kind of omens, and the information was usually for kings and rulers.
Yeah.
And do individual. It wasn't like you went to an astrologer and got your chart done.
No, it was for like pharaohs and Herod and
yeah, it was people like that, and they would give them, these things like your enemy is going to try to come and fight you or something like that.
Sure.
So there was that kind of thing, but the Magi were the wise men, so they knew that stuff, because that was one of the things they did, was study the stars in the sky. And they knew other things. They probably knew math. They probably knew what at the time was considered medicine, and interpreting dreams. So, but my take on the Magi and the star is that the star was supernatural.
Mhm.
And because it didn't behave like a regular star or planet, it led them to a certain place, and then it apparently disappeared when they went. They went to Bethlehem and asked Herod,
Right.
about, or wherever they went, and asked, well, where is this king? They didn't know. They didn't know.
Mhm.
And so then they're told, oh, here's this prophecy, Bethlehem. Then they go there. Then they see the star over the dwelling place of Jesus. Well, you can't do that with a regular star or a planet. I don't think it was a conjunction. I think because all of the events surrounding the birth of Christ are supernatural. Everything, the virgin birth is supernatural.
Yeah.
Mm.
The angel coming to Mary, to Joseph, to Zacharias, you have all of these supernatural goings on. And the angel coming to the fields, to the shepherds.
Yeah.
So I think this was another supernatural event around the birth and the early years of Christ. And so I think it was this Shekinah, the glory of God, that was over the dwelling place of Christ.
Hmm.
Just like the pillar of fire in the
I was gonna
desert,
say, yeah.
Mhm.
and the light over the tent of meeting that
Mm.
showed the presence of God, the glory of God in the wilderness with the Israelites. So I
Seems
think,
like you've gotten better at Bible reading since the early days. She's talking about Old Testament stuff
Right.
that most Christians
Yeah,
don't know.
sure.
So,
yeah,
okay,
I mean, this
last
is
question
yeah.
about the Bible and astrology, and then I am going to let Evan ask something. But
Yeah.
what you said something earlier about you had this sort of like vague notion that Christians didn't like astrology, or maybe it was anti-biblical. Do you think it is that the Bible mentions this kind of thing? Um,
Yeah.
you have in here in something in the notes about the Hebrew word for astrology. So talk a little bit about that, maybe.
Okay, yes, there is no Hebrew word for astrology because astrology is a modern word.
Yeah.
As compared to the Bible and compared to the Old Testament, it's not it they didn't have that word, but they understood the practice of astrology as, looking prognostication by the stars. So, looking at them to get some kind of message about the future, like fortune telling, or seeing the stars as gods and bowing down to them. So this idea of, I think, now somebody told me this, I don't know Hebrew, but somebody told me, maybe Evan knows Hebrew, that there is a word, a Hebrew word, dividing up the skies, and that
Hmm.
referred to astrology.
Hmm.
Because that was part of the thing they did when they were doing mathematical stuff to figure out the movement. So it would also refer to astronomy. But when God's forbidding this, he's forbidding astrology, which is a form of divination. And
Yeah.
divination definitely is addressed specifically in many places. Now, there is the word astrology pops up here and there, like Isaiah 47, the last 3 verses or so of Isaiah 47. This is a judgment on Babylon. And Isaiah is giving a judgment on Babylon. God is giving him these words. And towards the end, it denounces the astrologers. Well, it's denouncing sorcery and all these occult arts that Babylon has turned to instead of God. And astrology is mentioned at the end and says, even the astrologers will have no fire to warm themselves by. They're doing all this stuff, but it doesn't do them any good.
Mhm.
It's this very strong denunciation. Now, I have to, I can't remember now. I need to go look up and see what the Hebrew word here is. But apparently, it indicated astrology.
Yeah.
And so God does denounce astrology.
Interesting.
And he denounces divination, which would include tarot cards, palm reading, any kind of what you would call fortune telling,
Mhm.
reading tea leaves,
What about
all of
crystals?
that.
Are crystals something about divination, or is that just to like protect you or something?
There are people who look in, like psychics may look in a crystal because that gives them a focus, and that would be divination. But if you're using crystals like they usually do in the New Age, which is to wear them,
Yeah.
they believe they have energy in them because they're in the earth so long. They believe they soak up this energy from earth, and each
Ah,
crystal has
okay.
a different kind of purpose. Like this one's good for mental clarity. This one's good to attract love. This one's good for money, blah, blah, blah,
Gotcha.
So
Okay. Well, that
that could,
sounds like another conversation
yeah,
then.
that's another conversation.
Yeah.
So,
Petroleum is good for powering vehicles.
I've found that to be the case.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm curious, are people born under a bad sign? What do I mean by that? Like, I think that's a line in a song or something, right? Or maybe
Probably.
okay. But when someone would come to you and you would give them a reading, did you ever like they'd be like, oh yeah, it was March 14th in Chicago, Illinois, and you'd be like, okay, let me do the math. Oh man, you are doomed. Or was it like, okay, well, here are your strengths and weaknesses. Like you said earlier, it's like strengths, weaknesses,
Yeah.
life path, reincarnation. It's gonna, it's like here's the good and the bad, and everyone basically has a good and bad. And related to that was this. I mentioned it. I think the last time we talked, it was a Netflix movie about some uh, astrologer named Mercado. I think he had like a huge TV following. I don't even want people to necessarily watch the movie, um, but basically, what really was annoying was that this guy is an astrologer who is super famous, like only ever had positive things to say about everybody,
Yeah.
So it was like everybody, it was always great, and like this is what the stars were saying. So when was anybody doomed? Basically, is my question. As a result of when they were born, or was it always just kind of an equal mixed bag for everybody?
It was a mixed bag. And really, the way I put it, and the way most New Age astrologers would put it, would be in terms of negative and positive, not good and bad.
Okay.
Okay. So, of course, I didn't believe in evil. All right. So,
Mhm.
most astrologers don't believe in evil.
Interesting.
So, you believe in negative and positive potentials. So, I would tell people, okay, here you have this particular conjunction in your chart that's a very challenging conjunction, or a very challenging aspect between the sun and Saturn, let's say. And this is very difficult, but you can use it in a positive way. You can use the energy of the Saturn on your sun and make, basically make lemonade out of lemons.
Mhm.
So the idea is that you point the person towards the idea that they can do something positive with this energy in their chart, or they can do something negative, and maybe they've already experienced the negative side of it. And that's why charts, for example, of twins, first of all, even a few minutes difference can shift the chart enough to make it slightly different. But even if it's basically the same two charts, you can, and I did some charts for twins, or one person of the twin set, and I would say, you can choose to do this with these aspects of your chart, and then your twin may choose something else. And so your lives are not necessarily going to come out the same just because the charts are similar. So this is part of the influence of psychology,
Yeah.
and the idea of, and Carl Jung too, looking at
Yeah.
these kind of supposedly more profound meanings in the chart, so that it's not just this personal path that you're restricted on. You have these choices how to live it out. So that's how I did astrology, and I think most of the people I knew did astrology like that.
Let me ask you this, and we are sitting at an hour now, so we could go on forever, but when people would ask you, like, what's the harm in it now? What
Mm,
is your response to that? Maybe there's a couple of responses, because I feel like that so many people, whether it's the Enneagram or this or wearing crystals or whatever, it's like, okay, so it doesn't share a Christian worldview, but like, what's the harm? What would you say?
yes, that's a good question, Sarah. Yes, there is a harm here. You cannot take something that God forbids lightly. First of all, just as a Christian, if God is forbidding something and says have nothing to do with this, that should be enough for us.
Yeah.
Really, we should really just be like, okay, God says that's bad, that's wrong, I'm not going to do it. No matter whether we think we understand the reasons or not, God has said don't do it. But I can give you reasons. And of course, the astrology and all of the occult practices originated with the worship of false gods.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why in Deuteronomy 18, 10 through 14 is the passage that really talks about that. And it lists, I think it's verses 10 and 11, that list all the occult practices, casting spells, divination, contact with the dead, etc. That's all listed there. Spirit contact. And God is very clear, have nothing to do with this, because this is what they do in the nations where I am leading you. So he's leading them into the pagan, lands
Mm-hmm.
where people have turned away from God, and they have turned to false gods. And God tells them this. I mean, he tells them they have turned to false gods. And this this is something I abhor.
Yeah.
And, it's abominable to me. Don't do it, because these practices are connected to the worship of false gods.
Yeah.
So even if you're not worshiping a false god, you're doing a practice that comes from that and it's connected to it, because you're using a method that's looking for an answer that is not the way God gives us to find answers.
Yeah. That's a good way of saying it.
God gives us his word, he gives us prayer, he gives us counsel through other believers.
Mhm.
We find answers these other ways that God provides. We don't find them in these methods.
Yeah.
And one of the appeals of these methods is that they're quick and easy. So I have come across Christians who are in a crisis in their life. They're in a real crisis. They don't know what to do, or something bad has happened, and they're praying and they don't feel God's answering them. And they aren't getting what they need. So they will, out of desperation, go
Mhm.
to an astrologer or a psychic. I've
Yeah.
talked to many Christians who do this, and it usually doesn't end up very good. They stop going to church, they
Mhm.
stop reading the Bible, they stop praying, they start relying on the psychic or the astrologer. And I talked to one woman, I remember this so vividly, years ago. And after talking to me, she became convinced she could not see the psychic anymore. Actually, I'm sorry, it was an astrologer. I said, you need to just tell her you are not coming back. I said, don't give her an explanation. Just say, I'm not coming back. I've decided not to come back. Because I said, she'll try to argue with you.
Hmm.
And she was afraid to call
Yeah.
her. I said, and so I had to encourage her through that. She managed to do it, but it was very hard for her to do.
Yeah.
Because there's this tie that kind of forms. I'm not trying to make it sound, supernatural or anything, but there's this kind of bond that forms with these people if you're getting advice from them, and they have sort of this hold on you, and it can be very hard to break that.
Well, and you feel known. That's like one
Yeah,
of the
yeah,
core things that
exactly.
humans desire. But
Right, exactly. You feel like this person knows about me. They know my situation. They understand. They care about me, and maybe they really do care about you, but they do not have the answers for you.
that's right.
So I tell them, this is just going to get worse until you stop doing this. So
Yeah.
it's damaging, spiritually damaging. Now, of course, if you're not a Christian, it's really damaging because it can lead you further and further away from Christ. If you are a Christian, it can damage your walk with Christ, like this woman I talked to who
Yeah.
had stopped going to church. And so she wasn't getting fed spiritually. She wasn't getting what she should get as a Christian, reading the word or praying. And so she's basically famishing, spiritually. She's in a spiritual famine and getting this counterfeit from the astrologer.
Yeah. That's, man. If people want more information about this kind of thing, I would just highly recommend your website is a treasure trove for all kinds of I mean, you don't just talk about astrology, you talk about all kinds of cult and pagan practices, and even finding them in the most unlikely places. You might not think they are. They are. So check out Christian Answers for the New Age. Is it cana.org? What is it?
It's you have to type it out, Christian Answers for the New Age. If you just put that in Google, it'll
Yeah.
take you to the website right away. And on Facebook, if you put it in the search box on Facebook, it'll take you to my ministry page, which you can like and follow if you want to see. All my posts on there relate to the New Age and the occult.
Yeah, she's gonna find the pagan and the occult and all kinds of things that you're like, oh, I liked that, but yeah,
I'm
now I
not
can't
trying
see it the
to.
same again. I
I'm
know,
not
no, no,
trying
no.
to. It just is. It's so out there. The New Age is so mainstream. It's so easy to find. I finally
I
saw
know
and wrote a whole thing on Frozen 2.
too. Yeah.
And,
Well,
you know, because it's there. I mean, I am not going to say it's not there if it's there.
and as a former practitioner, you see it so much more quickly than so many. So I'm thankful for that because oftentimes you'll say something and I'll think, oh, yeah, now I see it. Of course, with
Yeah.
Frozen 2, I totally kept pausing it and saying, this is a mess. But anyway, we digress. We have got to go. Thank you so much for joining us today and
Thanks for having me.
helping us out again. We'll have to think of another. Maybe we'll talk about crystals next time or chakras or something.
Oh, yeah, I
But
can come up with several topics.
I bet. Anyway, well, thank you so much. And for
Thank
those
you.
listening again, subscribe, like us, all the things, and check us out at houstontot.com. You can also go to Facebook and check out Theology on Tap Houston. And until we see you next, we encourage you as always to question freely, think deeply, and disagree as needed.
Thanks.
Over and out.
Thank you, Marsha.
Marsha, thank you so much.
Thanks, Evan. Thanks, Sarah. I loved it. It was great. It's very stimulating talking to you guys. You asked good questions.
We'll do it
Awesome.
again.
Yeah. We'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Bye-bye.